Strategic Intelligence in the Planning Services Department. Mayo's strategy will always have ramifications to what we do on the DMC front, so thought it would be really helpful for you to see that vision and strategy moving forward and how we intersect. So I'll turn it over to Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Chair Rybeck, members of the board, it's a pleasure to be here on the behalf of Mayo Clinic today to share a little bit about our journey to 2030. What I'm going to share today is the background that gets us to our strategy. You're going to hear a lot about the look that we did into the future to determine what changes need to be made, what changes are expected in healthcare, and generally in the broader macroeconomic environment that apply to the way that we operate and we plan strategy. Our process really started with an in-depth review of what we expect to happen over the next 10 years and maybe even a little bit beyond that. It was the most in-depth review that Mayo's ever conducted as part of a strategic planning process. Then we paint that vision for the future, and we work backwards from that, thinking about our strategy and the things that we'll need to deploy over the next several years to be successful in that environment. So the first half of this presentation is really going to be about what we expect to occur over the next 10 years, that environment that we'll all be living in. The second half is really Mayo's response to that. So we'll dive in. If you have questions along the way, feel free to interrupt me, and we'll get through this. So first of all, not surprising to anyone, industries change. Industries change because the environment changes, because economics change, because technology emerges and disrupts industries. Healthcare is no different, although healthcare, you may argue, is behind other industries. If you look at what's happened in banking, in finance, in hospitality, in retail, very significant changes in those industries over a relatively short period of time. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. For healthcare, we're still operating in an older business model, and that business model is coming under pressure from a number of different sources. And we'll talk about those changes that will impact our environment as well. So I mentioned this look that my team did into the future. And as part of that, we engaged futurists, we talked with leading industry experts, we talked with others outside of the healthcare industry. We reviewed more than 200 research reports, and we identified 100 trends that could potentially impact healthcare in the next 10 years. Out of that, we narrowed it down to 30 and then distilled it down to 9 to 10 key things that we think are major disruptors. And I'm going to walk through those so you have a sense for the background of some of the things that we're projecting. First of all, artificial intelligence and innovation, the technology that's emerging. When you pair that with the data that's generated in healthcare, which is massive, you apply artificial intelligence, machine learning to that, you can unlock things that we can't unlock today. We're seeing most significant investment occurring in artificial intelligence in healthcare. So we know that this is an era of opportunity for us over the next 10 years, but it's not without its challenges. Cybersecurity is something that's on the minds of everyone, just about every industry, and healthcare is not immune to that. If you think about the number of connected devices that are in any hospital environment, it raises that level of risk. And certainly as technology advances, it advances for hackers as well. Cybersecurity is a significant risk. Because of the model that we're in with healthcare, we're ripe for disruption from technology. Technology can solve a lot of the problems that consumers have with healthcare. What they probably can't solve is the emotion component of it. That's why it's been slow to adopt. But big tech is making inroads into healthcare. Even this morning you see news from Google and their efforts with a number of hospitals across the United States to integrate their data, their patient records, to see what they can learn from that information and ultimately improve patient care. Consumerism. So we all carry around these. We wait about 3 nanoseconds to get an answer to any question that we have from Google. We can purchase things with one click from Amazon. And so we're consumed by that environment, right? We're all used to being able to get what we want, when we want it, how we want it, delivered the next day, or maybe even within an hour. It's probably not fair, but that environment is coming to healthcare, right? We should expect that of the healthcare environment. When you have a disease, when you have a condition, you should expect answers that come much more rapidly thanks to this environment that surrounds us. We know that there will be an economic downturn, probably 2 of them over the next 10 years. If you look historically, economic downturns occur about every 7 years. We're well beyond that. Probably not going to happen before an election, but shortly thereafter, we do expect an economic downturn. Job losses will come with that. There's been significant efforts made with automation in the background over the last decade, but there hasn't been the reason for employers to implement that automation because the economy has been driving so well. As soon as you have an economic downturn, suddenly it allows the opportunity for us to implement that automation. And what we would expect to see is job losses. Healthcare, from a macro environment, is increasingly unaffordable. And in fact, that's one of the reasons that we hear about the talk about a single payer plan. We hear about issues with unaffordability and access, and that continues to increase. As you pair some of these things, you start to run into trouble as you think about unaffordability over the next 10 years for healthcare. If healthcare is inaccessible and unequal to a large volume of people, there's going to be a change that needs to be made. And then finally, we talked a little bit earlier about innovation, acceleration, just the pace of change.
Yeah. Please, Mayor.
Yep.
Can I ask a question? I'm thinking about the job losses. And because we're in a time where we have a hard time filling jobs, is the job loss going to be as dramatic as maybe in the past because we have a workforce shortage?
Right.
So as we automate and as people lose jobs, can they not be placed more quickly than in the past, or am I misunderstanding that?
It's ironic, Mayor, because as you look at the current environment, one of the challenges is finding the employees to do the jobs. As you look at the future environment, what we'll see is a need to reskill or upskill to different jobs.
So it's the training component. Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Cybersecurity. How many times a day or a week is Mayo's door knocked on by hackers?
I don't know the exact number. It's a lot, right? We have a very strong. I don't know the exact number, but it is a significant number, and we have a very sophisticated team that works on that every day.
It comes from all over the world, right?
All over the world, yeah. Finally, what we see is this this rise in social division, and when you think about that and relate that to healthcare, this separation or potential separation between the haves and have-nots, those that can afford the most sophisticated, most groundbreaking treatments, and those that cannot. And that may be okay in some environments, some economic environments, whether if you're a have and can go to Disney and maybe you have not and can't go there, that's one thing. In healthcare, that's a very different story. And so we see challenges with that as we look to the future. When you look at the rising rate of unaffordability of healthcare, as you look at new advancing treatments and how they may or may not be covered by insurers and others, that presents some unique challenges for the global environment. So then we take all of that information and we put it together in a couple of ways. We look at, okay, what does this really mean for us? As you can tell by the previous slide, disruption is going to present itself as a variety of variables, and that's why many industries miss that. They try to time it based on one event, one thing that they think will be massively disruptive, and it turns out it's a bunch of little things that suddenly transform an entire industry. And the challenge for us and for many industries, for many healthcare organizations, is that it may not happen until it's too late. If you think about the iPhone and its release in 2007, in the days before that, people didn't really think that would happen. In the days after that, consumers widely adopted it, and it transformed about 7 different industries all in one fell swoop. The other challenge that we're faced with is that we, as humans, are very adaptable. If something comes along that we like better, it makes our life easier, we are quick to jump on it. And obviously, the developers of that, if you're not a leader, trying to fast follow in this future environment is going to be increasingly difficult. We also have looked at other industries to see the change in those other industries. I mentioned banking, retail, and hospitality. And when you think about the way that you reserve a hotel today versus the way that you did that 10 years ago, it's very, very different. In fact, you can reserve a room in someone's house today, which you couldn't do just 3 or 4 years ago. And what we see is that the wave of disruption in those industries was actually over a very short period of time, 11 to 15 years for this, time frame when you knew an industry and what it looked like to it look completely different. Healthcare is on that scale. The challenge is we don't exactly know where it is on that scale. We know it's not at year 0, and we know it isn't completely transformed, but it's on that scale. So we have to develop capabilities. Those industries that develop capabilities, those companies that develop capabilities to withstand kind of the multiple different changes over the years were those that survived and thrived in that environment. Those that tried to just transform their business model or digitize their business model the way that it was did not. So that's what separates the Targets from the Sears and the Amazons. So then we got creative and we started putting these things together. And this is really a tool that we use this year for the first time and will continue to use, which is about a forecast for the future. So you put a bunch of trends together and then you decide what would happen if these things merge together? What would that look like in our future environment? And we developed 5 different forecasts, and I just want to run through them quickly. The first one is this idea of an accurate diagnosis anytime, anywhere. So if we think about 5G technology and the rate of data transmissions, if we think about the amount of information that's being generated and the ability to sort through that information very rapidly using artificial intelligence and machine learning, you could have the possibility of delivering a diagnosis on your phone anytime, anywhere, in any environment. That dramatically changes the way that we think about the delivery of healthcare, and particularly as we think about the delivery of healthcare at scale. So it opens the door to opportunities where maybe in some cases, if you weren't confident about the diagnosis, the patient may need to travel or may need to go for more testing. If a physician is confident in diagnosis and it's available anywhere, it totally changes the way that you interact with individuals. The patient will see you now is a forecast really about consumerism, right? And it's about consumers taking much more control of their healthcare, consumers having the data and then deciding who they want to allow access to it. If you think about healthcare today, the amount of data that's being generated by you as an individual through your watch, through your genetic testing, that may or may not be available to your healthcare provider is increasing. And we'll continue to see app developers and others wanting access to that data in exchange for value to you. Virtual interactions will outpace physical interactions, and that shouldn't really be a surprise. Everything is shifting toward virtual and digital. The question for organizations like us is, how do you do that with a human touch? How do you deliver more virtual, digital care with that human touch that Mayo Clinic is so well known for? The fourth one is about research, education, and collaborations, and thinking about them differently. Traditional research models in healthcare are long-term models. Research occurs for many years, then there's testing before it moves to patient practice. In some cases, that's upwards of 17 years from the time an idea is found to the time it's implemented in practice. Future research models will be much more R&D focused, driven to find solutions to common healthcare problems, and much more rapid turnaround expected. Education, because of that reskilling and upskilling need, will need to change. And quite frankly, the way that education has been done in the past is changing dramatically already. And then collaborations are all about how do you grow capabilities much quicker than what you have in the past. And then finally, old business models become obsolete. That's what we've seen in other industries. That's what we worry about in healthcare, is that the way of doing business in the past is not the way of doing business in the future. So we need to be looking for those new business models that help organizations like ours thrive in that future environment. So, how does this translate to Mayo Clinic in our future? First of all, our mission and our vision not changing, right? We will still be who we are from the sense of what our main focus is, and that's on the needs of the patient come first, right? We will continue to strive to be that leading organization with serious and complex care that offers our counsel, our knowledge to others who are in need. What we do have is what we added as this part is an identity. As we think about 2030, what will Mayo Clinic's identity be? And it continues to resemble what you would see today, but probably delivered in a different way as we think about that future. Capabilities are going to be important for us, and we have a set of capabilities which we've been strong with over the years, and we have a set of capabilities that we need to build as we think about the future. So for instance, we have a very strong brand and reputation. We're well known for the patient experience. If you ask anyone who comes here, they often talk about that experience from when they walked in the door to the time that they left. Now, we have work to do on the pre-walking in the door and the post-walking out the door, but that's part of something that we need to build as we look toward the future. There are capabilities that we need to develop, much more consumer market knowledge. So for instance, if you look at Target and what they did as they went through this significant transformation, they doubled down on two things, right? So they doubled down on their technology and their data, and then they doubled down on their consumer insights, being able to take everything that they could learn about a shopper at Target and figure out how can I improve that. And that is what's expected of consumers. How can I be very personally treated? I'm different than Lisa, so the way that care is delivered to me, the way that I'm communicated with should be different than Lisa. Pace and speed to execution is something that we could work on. Data and innovation is something that we have a lot of, but how do you connect that? How do you constantly learn from that, right? That's something that every large healthcare organization struggles with, is a vast amount of data created on a daily basis. And how do you understand and generate insights from that that can ultimately improve the care that you deliver? So that leads us to 3 primary strategies, and these are kind of woven in together. You can think about it as a single 2030 strategy for us, with the words cure, connect, transform, and then that's supported by our people, innovation, and the environment that we provide care with. And I'm just going to briefly talk about cure, connect, and transform. So cure is really, how do we continue to advance the science of medicine? How do we continue to advance that top of the pyramid, as we would say, serious and complex care? How do we discover new disease, new illness, and how do we identify new treatments and deliver them in new and unique ways? Thinking about that through research and development, through innovation, but then also with a very consumer focus. So how do we continue to advance what we do today? How do we advance that in the future more rapidly and more boldly? Connect is really about, how do you connect this system for the benefit of the consumer? So how do you connect their knowledge with ours so we can deliver a better experience? How do we connect our infrastructure so we can improve our operations, so we can automate where we need to automate, but also so that we can become more efficient, we can create greater access, and we can deliver care at a greater scale. And then transform is really about the next business model. It's identifying the next business model in healthcare. We believe that part of that will come through platforms. If you look at platforms and think about a platform like eBay as a platform, Uber is a platform, Amazon is even a platform, where there are large volumes of consumers and suppliers who come together and provide and get a service from that. Platforms have completely transformed the industries that they've emerged in, and we believe that that will come to healthcare. So Mayo is looking at what is the role that we play in platform development as we move toward the future. And that ultimately will redefine the way that healthcare is delivered and redefine healthcare as an industry, we believe, as we look toward the future. So there you go. This basically says that if we can do all that, we will be awesome. And that's what we hope for. But really, when we accomplish all of these things, Mayo Clinic will be in a unique position. And that's what we're striving for, is to maintain the uniqueness of Mayo Clinic as a global leader in healthcare, but probably one who does it in a different way than what we do today, that has broad reach, that has a very personalized experience, but is also recognized for the strengths that we are today. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain any discussion or questions.
So let me just start it out, and what I want to do is have us put this within our work. So let me take off from the mayor's comment earlier about this strange dichotomy we have of a worker shortage. A few years ago it was really weird to get our head around a worker shortage because we were looking at high unemployment. Now there's this whole point that you're making that I think is so good, that we should be looking at what is a job dislocation. That argues from the really flat out literal interpretation we have to take in the works that we do. Does that mean we need less parking spaces? Okay. Then you look at this issue of talking about looking at this issue of technology evolving and wanting to emerge as a global leader, which is logical, you are, and you presumably can keep that. And you also want a human touch, which argues that we need to do more to make this more of a destination. That's our job. And so how does somebody arrive in this town? So that means, for instance, easier parking or a better transit experience, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just trying to break this down into super literal things that you look at the environment of the rest of the place to execute yours, and that we do that. So I just want to open that a little bit for us as we look at that. What do you hear in our work that relates to this? And
the conflict? Well, certainly it's been since the civilization of the news, but I would add to this that this...
Should this be changing our planning? And while I'm teeing that up for the board, what are you projecting on the number of people who are going to work here and visit here, and how...
to national security, to justify, of course, U.S. intervention in the region, and to push Mexico, as Alex was saying, and also Colombia, of course, into the militarization of their own countries. So because of this narrative, because of this common standardized understanding of so-called drug cartels as organizations that can challenge supposedly the power of the state, we have grown immensely our security apparatus, doubling up our armed forces and allowing them publicly to act and occupy their territory, to force us to live in a state of siege in our own nation. And this is a narrative that must be challenged, must be criticized if we are really going to understand how violence operates, how it has detonated everything in our country, and how to descale that militarization itself.
Oswaldo, how do you see the drug war being covered by journalists in Mexico versus here in the United States?
In reality, I see very little difference when it comes to the general narrative. Most of our common understanding about the drug trade has been instigated by an official narrative that began sometime in the 1970s, but then it became radicalized in the 1980s under President Reagan. We have now a common understanding that has been interiorized by most of the people working in the media today.
About whether it be targeted businesses or workforce participation. In prevailing wage compliance, I don't want to discount prevailing wage compliance because, there's been a number of instances where we found discrepancies in what people have been paid, and they've been, issued supplemental pay for that. And so that's an important part of the accountability process that's interjected with our compliance work. So we're happy to provide you that level of detail. We certainly have it, and happy to provide it as you see fit. Again, some of the key takeaways there. I think the key takeaway is we are really focused on growing the goal in order for us to address some of our challenges, which is the low number of certified contractors that we have in the region to meet these goals. That's part of the outreach that our team is now doing is how do we work with people to educate them on the certification process? How do we find those areas where there's currently gaps, where there's more work out there than what we have providers for? And how do we grow people into those types of occupations and partner with the workforce development sector in order for us to make progress on that issue? And I know Jory's doing an amazing job creating those types of connections, but also it was acknowledged by Commissioner Beer, we have a national shortage of skilled.
And I think part of it was to
Figure out how we build.
Sense of detail.
Local experiences and local voices are really important, and they need to be given a much more public platform to change what we think of the war on drugs in Mexico.
Oswaldo Zafala is a professor of Latin American Studies at CUNY and author of The Cartels Do Not Exist. And Alex Aviña is an associate professor of history at Arizona State University. Thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Programming is supported by Summit Academy OIC, a nonprofit career and technical training adult education center, helping to diversify the workforce by increasing skill sets and earning potential in under-resourced communities. Learn more at summitworks.org.
I'm James Kumarasamy, host of BBC NewsHour. Coming up today, the latest on the standoff between police and protesters at a Hong Kong university. Iran shuts down the internet after days of fuel protests. And what are the legal implications of Prince Andrew's TV interview?
BBC NewsHour coming up after 2 o'clock on NPR News. At 3 o'clock, it's All Things Considered. Now, folks out in far western Minnesota seeing some peaks of sunshine, but generally it's cloudy across the state. Temps in the 30s, some upper 20s along the Iron Range. Highs today should be in the mid-30s northeast, 40s in the southwest, and then could see some rain and snow with up to 2 inches of accumulation possible across northern Minnesota tonight. Lows near 30 tomorrow, cloudy, highs in the mid-30s northeast, 40s in the southwest. More on the weather can be found at the Updraft blog at nprnews.org.
Hi everybody, I'm Tanzina Vega, and this is The Takeaway. On Saturday, Louisiana voters narrowly re-elected incumbent Governor John Bel Edwards, one of the last remaining Democratic leaders in the Deep South.
Our shared love for Louisiana is always more important than the partisan differences that sometimes divide us. And as for the president, God bless his heart.
During the campaign, his opponent, Republican businessman Eddie Rispone, leaned heavily on President Donald Trump, who won the state by 20 percentage points in the 2016 presidential election.
Louisiana, we are Trump country. We love President Trump and he loves Louisiana.
Rispone there talking on stage with the president before Saturday's election. President Trump held 2 rallies in Louisiana over the past 10 days. But his support of Rispone wasn't enough to swing the gubernatorial election. Joining me now is Jessica Rosegard, a contributing reporter to WWNO in New Orleans. Jessica, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So John Bell Edwards won re-election with 51% of the vote. Talk to me a little bit about what was his message that convinced Louisiana voters to give him 4 more years?
You know, he really ran on his record. 4 more years of progress, in his opinion. He ran on his record of Medicaid expansion. He got a pay raise passed for public school teachers, which was only their second in a decade. He's got low unemployment and good job growth, and he's balanced the state budget. So he really ran on all of those achievements and avoided, taking this fight to a national level.
Speaking of a national fight, President Trump did campaign heavily for responding. He made 3 trips to Louisiana to rally against Governor Edwards. He did something similar a few weeks ago. We saw in Kentucky, and we saw how the race turned out there, similar to what we're seeing here in Louisiana. Why has the president invested so much in these particular races?
Well, these are all obviously red states. Kentucky was a bit different because they had an unpopular incumbent Republican. Louisiana had a pretty popular incumbent Democrat. Edwards is a conservative Democrat, but as for Trump, he's not doing so great in Washington right now. He lost the House in the midterms, and he's under impeachment. So he really wanted to fire up his base in these strongly red states, and through his reputation behind these Republican candidates. And in 2 of the 3 cases, it didn't work out. He tried to paint Edwards as a tax and spend liberal, but again, Edwards is a conservative Democrat. He's pro-gun, he's pro-life, and I think based on some of those things, he obviously attracted Democrats in the state, despite those conservative leanings, and was able to pull enough Republicans over to win.
Let's break some of that down a little bit because, like you said, Trump did have an effect on this race, but not the one he was hoping for. What was the turnout like? Who ended up coming out to the polls?
Yeah, that's a great point. Turnout in the race was very high. Early voting numbers broke records for non-presidential years. Black voter turnout in particular was up from the primary thanks to a very strong get out the vote effort by the Edwards team. So Edwards' pockets of support were rather large pockets in your urban and suburban areas, whereas Responding really had all his support in the rural parts of the state. But from the primary to the runoff, overall voters increased by about 165,000 people, and there was a total of over 1.5 million votes cast in this election.
And did conservatives stay home? Did Trump supporters stay home in this one?
It looks like Trump actually had that effect of turnout, maybe engaging turnout on both sides, right? You had conservatives who might have
about
turned out because of
whether it be targeted businesses or workforce participation. In prevailing wage compliance, I don't want to discount prevailing wage compliance because, there's been a number of instances where we found discrepancies in what people have been paid, and they've been, issued supplemental pay for that. And so that's an important part of the accountability process that's interjected with our compliance work. So we're happy to provide you that level of detail. We certainly have it, and happy to provide it as you see fit. Again, some of the key takeaways there. I think the key takeaway is we are really focused on growing the